Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolutely fascinating blueprint that proposes a totally new future for island living in the Maldives. Now, look, when most of us think of the Maldives, we immediately picture, those luxury resorts and perfect vacation getaways. But what about the people who actually live there full time? How do you go about building a functional, thriving society on these tiny, dispersed patches of land right in the middle of the ocean? Well, this proposal is basically a masterclass in modern urban planning, and we're going to unpack exactly how it all works.
But before we really get going on this guided tour, I want you to just stop and ask yourself, what actually makes a perfect island community? Think about it for a second. It's way more than just slapping down some houses. You've got to figure out how infrastructure, housing, and the delicate ecology all interlock to create a community that's truly self-sufficient. You're constantly fighting against limited space, a heavy reliance on imports, and, of course, the raw forces of nature. So how exactly do they plan to solve that puzzle? Well, to make this massive proposal a bit easier to digest, we're going to break this down into 4 stages. First up, we'll look at the Grand Island vision. Second, family and community living. Third, services, transport, and the economy. And finally, building a sustainable future. So we'll start with the big picture and zoom all the way down into daily life. All right, let's jump into part 1, the Grand Island vision, focusing on creating self-sufficient communities. So the core vision here is actually super specific. The goal is to create self-sufficient, peaceful, and family-friendly island communities. It completely frames the island not just as a place to crash after work, but as a holistic, complete living ecosystem. That phrase right there, complete living environment, that's the magic key. It means you absolutely shouldn't have to leave the island for your basic everyday needs, but you still keep that vital, strong lifeline to the nearby cities for the bigger stuff. And that overarching vision, it breaks down directly into 6 non-negotiable planning principles that govern literally every single inch of this design. We're talking about family-centered housing, incredibly green and walkable spaces, universal access to your essential services, infrastructure that can actually take a hit and bounce back, economic self-reliance so the island generates its own wealth, and of course, really strong inter-island connectivity. Seriously, every single decision in this blueprint ties back to these 6 pillars. Moving right along to part 2. Family and community living, or what they call multi-generational hubs. Picture this. You're walking into one of these new residential zones. They don't just zone for random isolated apartment blocks. Instead, they specifically mandate these multi-generational housing clusters. The whole idea is to keep grandparents, parents, and kids living super close together, all sharing these lush green courtyards. They even strictly enforce a mandatory minimum green space for every single household, so you get shaded sitting areas and gardens right at your doorstep. It's kind of like the ultimate anti-suburb. It actively forces family bonding and boosts mental well-being by literally building nature right into your living room. And to protect that peaceful vibe, they deliberately put these homes miles away from any noisy industrial stuff. You get completely safe, dedicated walking paths linking your front door directly to the schools and markets. And it's deeply, deeply inclusive. The blueprint demands elderly-friendly zones packed with ramps, shaded benches, and plenty of rest areas. Plus, they mix up the housing types, so you've got single-family homes right next to duplexes and apartments. That way, anyone, no matter their age or mobility, can easily navigate their neighborhood without feeling like they're running a marathon. Okay, let's look under the hood in part 3, services, transport, and economy. Basically, the engine of the island. If you're raising kids, this is huge. They've mapped out a guaranteed, localized education pipeline built right into the island itself. It's a super clear 4-step path. It starts at preschool, moves up to primary, then lower secondary, all the way through to higher secondary, like your A-levels. And it's entirely backed up by digital classrooms and remote learning tech. That means a child can spend their entire formative educational life right in their own community. No more of those stressful early morning boat commutes just to get to a basic math class.
What they've built here is a really smart hub-and-spoke model. All your fundamental education, everything up to high school graduation, happens right at home. But then, for university degrees, highly specialized vocational training, or professional certs, students just hop on reliable transport links to the nearby city islands. It's incredibly pragmatic. You don't try to cram a university onto every single tiny island. Instead, you build amazing foundational schools locally and just make sure the transit to the bigger educational hubs is absolutely seamless.
That exact same logic applies when we look at the local clinic. The island guarantees a really robust primary health care and elderly care system. You've got a center with a general practitioner, maternal care, emergency stabilization, and a fully stocked pharmacy. But they go beyond that. mandating telemedicine rooms for remote specialist consults, and a dedicated elderly daycare offering both physiotherapy and social activities. They even provide home care services for bedridden residents. The whole point is to make sure the most vulnerable folks get dignified daily support without ever having to leave their home turfs. So again, we see that really pragmatic split. Daily ailments, maternal health, or an immediate emergency, that's all handled locally. But for the big stuff, major surgeries, advanced diagnostics like MRIs, or sitting down with a top-tier specialist, patients are quickly transferred to city hospitals using priority emergency transport. It keeps the local clinics fast, uncluttered, and highly responsive to daily needs while keeping the really specialized care efficiently centralized. But how do you actually connect all this? To make these vital links to city hospitals and universities work, they guarantee universal mobility. The island leans heavily on high-frequency, scheduled ferries dedicated to different groups, like students or workers. Once you actually step off the boat onto the island, it's all about green transit, electric buggies, and minibuses. And this is crucial. There is a strict, non-negotiable mandate for ramps, elevators, and wheelchair pathways literally everywhere. Accessibility isn't just an afterthought, it's baked right into the concrete of the community. Now, an island obviously needs a heartbeat to thrive, right? On one side of the coin, you have these bustling economic hubs that slash the need for imports, fresh produce and fish markets, retail shops, and local workshops for things like carpentry, boat repair, and even tech support. But on the flip side, you have these incredible recreational spaces to balance out all that work. Beautifully landscaped parks, football grounds, community halls, youth centers. It's basically the perfect split between generating a strong local economy and generating actual, genuine joy for the community. But, behind all those bustling markets and pretty parks, there's this invisible, rock-solid utility network. When you live on an island, you need absolute guarantees. We're talking guaranteed backup power using a mix of solar, massive batteries, and generators. You've got a dedicated port just for cargo and fishing, plus mandatory backup systems for water desalination and storage. Throw in high-speed fiber internet and 5G, plus dedicated emergency disaster shelters, and what you get is a highly modern society that is totally insulated against supply chain shocks and extreme weather. Which brings us to our final stop, Part 4, building a sustainable future, ensuring resilience for the next generations. We're not just talking about vague, feel-good green policies here. This framework weaves environmental protection straight into everyday life. We're looking at practical daily habits, mandatory waste segregation, widespread composting, and solar-powered street lighting to drastically cut energy use. And on a larger scale, it outlines critical ecological defenses, specifically coastal protection initiatives and major mangrove restoration projects, along with literal green belts wrapping around the homes. And that's not just for looks. Those mangroves are absolutely essential for protecting the shoreline from erosion and rising sea levels. So who actually runs all this? Well, it's a tag team effort to manage such a complex system. On the one hand, you have the official island councils doing the heavy lifting, managing the public services, maintaining the infrastructure, running the big community programs. But on the other hand, you've got grassroots resident committees. These folks champion the localized social and environmental causes, overseeing elderly care on a personal level, driving youth development, and actually leading the local environmental efforts. It's top-down infrastructure perfectly shaking hands with bottom-up community care. All right, bringing it all together, what's the actual end game here? The core expected outcome of this massive master plan is to create such an incredibly high quality of life locally that it actually relieves the intense population pressure that is currently squeezing the capital city of Malé. Right now, people are forced to flock to the capital for decent jobs, schools, and hospitals, which leads to crazy overcrowding. By building these peaceful, family-oriented communities with their own booming local economies and resilient infrastructure, you give people a really powerful, beautiful reason to stay and thrive right on their home islands. And honestly, that leaves us with a pretty massive question to ponder. We've just explored a very specific solution tailored for the Maldives. But as coastal communities and isolated regions all over the globe face the exact same pressures, rising oceans, fragile supply chains, and overpopulated cities, could this comprehensive integrated framework actually be the exact blueprint the rest of the world needs? It's definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning how we build the world around us.